Tēnā tātou. He tika kia rere atu aku mihi tuatahi ki a koe te hākoro. Nā uano I whakatūwhera tēnei wāhi ki a tātou. Tai atu ki tērā puti e noho ana ki muri I a koe me te reo karaka I horahia ki muri te aroaro tēnei rōpu ko whakarauika nei. Nā reira, ki a koe e te taua, tēnā koe e te hākoro, e te kaiwhakarite, tēnā koe me wau mihi. Me wau mihi I whakatakoto mai ki muri te aroaro hei hāpai I wā tātou tikaka. Nā reira, tēnā koe. Tēnā koutou katoa, koutou I haramai tawhiti, koutou I haramai tērā wahi, te ika māui, ki te waipounamu, nau mai ki o tautahi, aha koe haramai koutou I hea, tēnā tātou. Kia ora everybody, welcome. Sorry that I wasn't here to welcome you last night, but it is with great joy that I stand here today. Actually, it's a bit of trepidation as well, but we'll get to that. But great joy that I stand here and welcome you to this kaupapa. Thank you, not only for coming to Christchurch, thank you for coming to Te Waiponamu, for those of you who live a little further afield, but to all of you, thank you for doing what you do. Ko aura ki te mauka, waitaki te awa, ko te Waiponamu te waka. Ko tāki timu ara I te uru aku waka karaka. Hoi anō, no aurua no moiraki a hau, ko e raka kai ko o ku manawa. Nā reira, a aura ki e mihi atu ana ki o koutou mauka whakahi. So I'm going to start by just saying, hi. My mountain of Aoraki extends its greetings to the mountains that have gathered here. Some people believe their mountains don't move, but in a Māori worldview they certainly do, and you have brought them with you along with your own whakapapa, your own connections, your own whānau here today. So I come from a little heart space. My heart spaces are my two marae down in Bluff. Most people know where Bluff is. That's good, because you go in the North Island and they don't. And then a place called Moiraki. So my two main marae are Bluff and Moiraki, and I also whakapapa to this place, but that's where my heart beats. So, speaking at a sexual health conference, well, that's exciting. And that's also why I have to say there was a little bit of trepidation, because one stands in a place like this, in times like this, and thinks, why me? And what have I possibly got to share? I'm hoping that my view of the kaupapa that's in front of us will add something to the discussion. But even if you don't go away feeling enriched and no pressure from that introduction, but even if you don't go away feeling like I've contributed to something of your thinking, I'd like to say thank you, because it's made me think a little bit more about the topic at hand, and also my role. I'm the General Manager of Oraka, or Wellbeing, at Ngaitahu, and I have the privilege of having the portfolio of hauora and health, along with education and a few other things under my portfolio, so this has been good. Okay, speaking of whakapapa, the title that I gave this kōrero today, as you can see, is Tātou a mo kauri a muri ake nei, for us and our children after us. And I wanted to focus on this kōrero, this kaupapa of whakapapa, and what it means within the context of sexual and reproductive health. Whakapapa is there. It's there to me. You can look at me standing here in front of you today and see that not only might I hail from Bluff and Moiraki, there might be a few other things, few other blood streams running along in these veins. I'm proud of my whakapapa, all of my whakapapa, but I've also got a very developed a sound understanding of what that means and the responsibilities and the accountabilities that come with it. Does everyone here know what whakapapa is? It's a bloody good start, although there are a few people who didn't nod their heads. Whakapapa is your genealogy. It's your lineage, it's your genealogy. And in te ao Māori, in the Māori world, and with a Māori world view, whakapapa has pride of place. Our whakapapa defines who we are as Māori, and it influences how we see the world and the relationship we have to it. From a cultural perspective, we use whakapapa to help link us to people, to place, and in the context of this conversation here today as well, to purpose. Our whakapapa gives us a place to stand, a tūraka waiwai. it also provides the opportunity of being a mooring post. It is our intergenerational connector. And it's also the determinant of our social and cultural narrative as a people. To know your place within a Māori worldview is to understand the connection between the physical landscape and the history that has helped shape it and adorn it, both in terms of its traditions and its people, and also the legacy that those people have carved upon that land. One's connection to place is what provides a person the right to stand, the right to have a voice. Their tūraka waiwai, their standing place in the living world and their connection to their ancestral worlds. Importantly, that's also the connection to the world of their descendants, those yet to come. That connection creates a platform for understanding your role within that landscape and the responsibilities associated with belonging. This understanding links all of us. It links an individual or a collective genealogically to the environment and its features, the mountains, the rivers, the coasts, and the valleys. You become one of a wider part of the natural landscape, inextricably tied by story, by prose, by memory, and experience to its very heartbeat, its pulse. If whakapapa is endangered, the pulse is threatened. There's an inherent responsibility and requirement within a Māori worldview to think back and also to think ahead, to always remember the journeys and the trials, the fights and the efforts, the achievements and the milestones, the accomplishments of our ancestors, while also making sure that we have our children and our future descendants at the forefront of our minds, especially when we consider what we're doing now. This intergenerational connection and understanding is what has helped my people drive the longest unbroken petition in New Zealand's history, our treaty grievance, our treaty claim, te kereme. Even though Ngāi Tahu were invisible to most of the country, and it appeared to many that, especially helped by politicians and media alike, that Ngāi Tahu just seemed to pop up out of nowhere 20 or so years ago. Ngāi Tahu, on the other hand, had had 7 generations of our people, 7 generations committed to driving the kaupapa of our claim. That's 150 years of unbroken petition, fundraising, protesting, litigation. Whole communities united and driven to pursue a resolution to the injustices experienced that put at risk the very existence of us as a people. And you know, they did that, 150 years, 7 generations, they did that without thinking they were going to see necessarily the benefits in their lifetime. One of the proverbs born from the claim by a leader from my marae at Moeraki, Hastings Tipa, said, "Mō tātou, mō kauria muriake nei," for us and our children after us. It's so simple, and as a young language learner, I remember thinking, wow, they could have stretched, the whakatauki so simple, they could have stretched the creative imagination a little further. It's really basic. You want a proverb to be flowery and nice and all exciting, but for us and our children after us, when I was in my 20s, I thought, boring, didn't quite hit it. I'm a little older now. And the beauty is actually in its simplicity. It's now been 20 years since the signing of our settlement of our claim, a claim that started in February 1849. So then the question must be asked, if whakapapa, legacy, and intergenerational responsibility are all so key and fundamental to the Māori way of thinking, why then, when considering sexual and reproductive health, do we continue to put it so much at risk? The reality is that most of our people have suffered intergenerational trauma, cultural, social, and economic isolation and dislocation. They no longer necessarily have the cultural narratives to bind them to the past in the same way that they did when they had their language, their culture, their cultural strength, and their self-determination. Unfortunately, the role of whakapapa and its mana in our world today has become less and less significant in the minds and hearts of each generation. And probably understandably so. That's what happens. We are now dealing with whānau who have been intergenerationally disengaged. And for many, the challenge is one of understanding and hope. Understanding that this current reality that Māori and Ngāi Tahu are in, that this isn't as good as it gets for Māori. It can't be as good as it gets for Māori. Understanding that traditionally, our people weren't determined by the statistics of social deprivation and poor health. Understanding that the current stereotypes associated with those negative statistics that have become associated with Māori, that they actually have nothing to do with being Māori at all. If you believe that they are about being Māori, then it's really hard to think of hope. Because you can't actually change your genetics once you're there. So why today, why in the generations gone, would we put that potential, that hope at risk? Because we are at risk. My people now total around 57,000. My Ngāi Tahu tribe is growing all the time, but we're about 57,000 in number. But we're a young population. We're very young. 50% are now under the age of 30. 25% of our people are under the age of 15. And the challenges that that young population are facing across all of the health indicators are significant. We are overrepresented in most negative statistics that you can draw out. And it's no different when we consider sexual health. What is concerning for me is that little seems to have changed since I can remember talking at a conference on fertility in Whakapapa over 15 years ago now. What's changed? We've got bigger, but so has the problem. When preparing for this conference, I came across a report that was actually from 2006. In my mind, that didn't seem that long ago, but it's actually a few years ago now. Tō tātou hokakatanga, Action and Intervention in Sexual and Reproductive Health, a report prepared for the Health Research Council of New Zealand in 2006. Back then, they identified a number of key issues pertaining to Māori sexual health, including a lack of kaupapa Māori provision for sexual health and reproductive health, challenges around... thank you, you're welcome. I'm not going to bust out the Moana song, you're welcome, but you're welcome. Challenges around the complexity of the range of services required to appropriately support communities. That is, not one shoe will fit all. Māori overrepresentation in the negative statistics, and the stigmatising and problematising of Māori fertility. What's changed? 2006. Back then, the Ministry of Health had highlighted some of the statistics of sexually transmitted infections. Now you, in your professions, think if the picture's changed. Back then, what the ministry said was the current data... There we go. The current data show that the overall rates for chlamydia and gonorrhea and genital warts are highest in 15 to 19 years age group. Rangatahi Māori appear to have higher rates of STIs than Pākehā, especially for chlamydia and gonorrhea, both of which can have long-term impacts on health, such as ectopic pregnancy and infertility. Over 70% of those with concurrent multiple infections were aged less than 25 years, and Māori were approximately 2 times, and Pacific people 3 times more likely to have concurrent infections. What's changed? There is anecdotal evidence that the disparity in health statistics is continuing to increase. The worst case scenario we predict is that we're looking at an infertility crisis for Māori in coming years. So I ask again, why would we continue to put this at risk? If whakapapa is such an important part of who we are as Māori, why aren't our communities up in arms about the statistics and mobilising on a mass scale to address these issues? Why isn't Ngaitahu driving the issue with the same passion and commitment that we did the claim? And fight for our rights, fight for our place, fight for our existence. We did it for 150 years, and man, we showed some resilience. But this topic, it's hardly on the radar. The reality is, other than a small committed and driven group, by and large, it is not something we talk about. Sexuality in our bodies, our sexual reproductive health in general, is no longer something we talk about. I believe the biggest challenge to us is silence, and the silencing of these kōrero within our whānau. That silencing has been the greatest and possibly the most dangerous disease of all. I know that this is what it's been like for me growing up in both Māori and Pākehā world. So I've battled ignorance, fear, stigma and infertility, and tried to navigate my own understanding of sexual and reproductive health within the context of a largely silent community. As a speaker of Māori and English, that silence goes across both languages. The paradox of the situation has always confronted me. How can we claim something to be so important at the same time not have the language to talk about it? The very thing that threatens us. Are we in denial? Or is the weight of this issue on top of all the other issues, the other socioeconomic deprivation indicators, is it just too much? Do the challenges of sexual and reproductive health simply have to take a back seat to the challenges of food, social and economic security, housing and employment? Do they not even get a look in? I was lucky in some respects because I grew up in a family of medical people. That has its downfalls as well. My grandfather was a surgeon, my Māori grandmother a charge nurse, the first Māori nurse in New Zealand to get the title of a sister charge nurse. My mother trained as a nurse when I was 5, and I had a sister who later became a mental health nurse. The topics discussed at our dining room table were never dull, and significantly more detailed and graphic than one might like to have been listening over dinner time conversation. But it meant that we had an environment where medical issues, hauora issues of all sorts, were discussed, and an environment where questions could be asked. But it changed for me when I just about hit 13. Because my parents loved me, they sent me to a Māori boarding school in Auckland. It's the only one of 5 children to go to Māori boarding school, so one wonders. But anyway, they sent me, looking like this, into the middle of Auckland. And I fell into a completely different world. All of a sudden, as a young girl, I had to learn quickly that my way of being Māori wasn't the right way of being Māori. All of a sudden, I learned that we weren't meant to like our bodies or be proud of our bodies. We weren't actually allowed to really talk about them. I had to learn that Māori girls, for instance, didn't wear swimming togs. We were meant to go through some new strange cultural dance of slipping into the water fully clothed, and with much drama, slipping from the towel to the side of the pool so no one could see you. I know some of you know what I'm talking about. Suffice to say that I didn't fit in with my cool 90s white and black bikinis. It wasn't the only reason why I didn't fit in, but the fact that I had gone with a relatively positive view of myself, didn't have some of those hang-ups, was confronting for me to see a world where that wasn't okay. The tikanga I learned about having my period was also shrouded in shame and full of what I couldn't do and shouldn't do. It was all coined in the negative. Even the terms used in Māori back then for periods, for issues about the body, were negative. And that started being really problematic for me quite early on, because I, as I didn't know it then, but had severe endometriosis. And I was at boarding school and away from the conversations of my home environment. It felt really that I'd been silenced. It didn't seem right, because what I knew and what I'd been raised with was an understanding of a Māori culture where actually people did discuss sex and bodies, desires and issues. These reflections later made me question why things had changed. I knew that historically, even in terms of our tribal narratives and creation stories, that sexuality and reproductive health was something to actually be celebrated and be open about. As an example, our carvings and art were testament to this, although depending on the characters could be accused of being slightly exaggerated in terms of the representation of certain aspects of genitalia. The point is that they weren't hidden. They were loud and, well, proud. Māori traditionally were encouraged to know your body and respect it, its functions, its roles, its health, and to know so intimately. It wasn't something to be ashamed of. So what happened? Well, culture shift happened. We learned a different way of thinking about ourselves. Sex was considered to be, and this is from Vincent O'Malley, in an article on the sexual frontier. Sex was considered a normal and healthy part of everyday life with no particular taboos around it. Copulating couples were depicted in carvings and bawdy stories and waiata concerning sexual exploits, or the size of men's penises. Well, these were common. It was common for the female vulva to be depicted around above the entranceway into meeting houses, in this way removing the tapu from anyone who passed underneath. And it goes on. The reality is, kei te pai, kia ora. I think that's on a lean, so I'll put it down there, otherwise it could get messy. The reality was, because these images and the way Māori were about their body, the openness of the conversation, the openness about themselves and their sexuality, because this was so confronting to the new culture that had arrived, it changed. There was a whole period where the missionaries would go and cut off all phallic symbols of the carvings around Māori marae around the country. And I read, when I was researching this, an article that said, funnily enough, in the museum, sometimes the posts decayed, but the penises survived. Interesting point. So as colonialism and Christianity took hold, and these new values and beliefs were supported and reinforced by an education system that devalued Māori cultural understandings and worldview, Māori started to adopt a new way of seeing and treating their sexuality and health. And it stopped being something that they owned and that they were in control of, and they started conforming to another way of being. And like many things, it's not just Māori, this happened with any group that have been colonised anywhere in the world. But like many things, the colonised starts to live not only up to the expectations that others have of them, but it's like they're on steroids. They do it better and greater than anyone else. It was also compounded by the fact earlier on, at the same time that we were having this cultural shift, that introduced venereal diseases started to have a huge impact and take hold on Māori communities. By the 1820s and 30s, in a place that Raniera Dallas hails from, which is a testament to resilience that he's here today. Sorry, Raniera. They started recording significant issues for the first time of Māori infertility because of the generational impact of venereal diseases in the 1830s. At that stage, Māori and two Māori couples found it difficult to bear children. Māori women were actively encouraged to take Pākehā husbands so that they could reproduce and ironically protect the Whakapapa. I'm not suggesting that we sit back now and blame the current situation on the impact of colonialism, on the behaviours and practices of Māori communities. But I am suggesting that understanding the historical context can shed some light on the challenges we're now facing in terms of the communication barriers that contribute to the current situation. It gives some context as to why many in our community have significant difficulty in disclosing issues around their body and sexual or reproductive health. I've been fortunate enough to have had both the tools and the supports to be able to access information and guide me through my own challenges, especially in reproductive health as a sufferer of endometriosis, polycystic ovaries. I need not go on, we've only got a limited time. But medically, I had great supports, and I also had enough medical professionals in the family to help me navigate my options and treatments. But even then, as a Māori language speaker and an advocate, I became acutely aware early on that the silence in this area within our wider Māori community had resulted in a dearth of appropriate words in the Māori language to effectively communicate sexual and reproductive health kaupapa. I've struggled with this myself, with my own children, now 13 and 14. I didn't have the words. I've only raised them speaking Māori. I only speak Māori to them. I struggled to find the words to even explain before my daughter was about to get her menstrual cycle what that might mean. In fact, I actually asked for a reprieve. I said, honey, this is going to be a new area for me. I might have to speak to you in English. And she looked at me and went, what? Then well, I need to have a talk with you. And she rolled her eyes, as teenagers do. I said, but I'm not sure that I know the words. So we're sitting there and I'm feeling, this is a big moment for me, trying to have this kōrero with my daughter. And I start fumbling in English here. And she said, oh, Mum, can you just speak Māori? This is just too torturous. She said that to me in Māori. And I realised really quickly that I did actually have the words in English, but with the relationship that I had with my daughter, by turning to English meant that immediately it was foreign to her. She had an emotional reaction to me trying to explain something in English. And yet I struggled to explain it in Māori. It hadn't been that long beforehand that I'd actually had to petition the Māori Language Commission to come up with the Māori word for endometriosis. You look what the Māori words are for things like chlamydia, gonorrhea. See how you go. Most of them come up with some generic term of mate ai, sexual diseases. How do we even hope to explain in Māori to our children the differences, the way they can be contracted, what the symptoms might be if we don't have the words? And why don't we have the words? Because actually, as I said previously, Māori had an incredible lexis available to them to describe every little detail of anatomy and physical condition. But we lost the language when it got silenced. I needed to ask the Māori Language Commission for a term for endometriosis because I was trying to explain it really clumsily again to my peers about the condition I had, why I was always in hospital, what was happening. I did not have the language tools available to me to talk about cervical smears, UTIs. Because the kaupapa was really discussed in Māori context, the words and concepts had fallen out of the vernacular of our people. And like myself, our people were left struggling to explain, let alone understand, this world. Whether it is through the medium of Māori or English, that the doors of awareness and communication for Māori communities are opened again, the important thing is we need to understand they need to be opened. Importantly, it helps to know that these cultural barriers we may be experiencing now aren't derived from a traditional Māori belief system. It's not too tapu to talk about. We don't have the need to shroud ourselves, to hide ourselves, to restrict the conversations about ourselves, we do not have them in our traditional Māori values. These are new. And actually, that newness provides a glimmer of hope. It means that we can potentially break the communication barrier and start to allow for more open discussions that allow for greater understanding and greater support if we acknowledge why we're in the crap situation we're in today. That understanding will in turn serve to empower whānau to take a greater ownership of their hauora and be proactive about their health, thereby protecting themselves and their whakapapa. It's not just an issue of sexual or reproductive health. The statistics aren't just an issue of negative outcomes. It has to be seen in the wider context of the way Māori feel about themselves, have been made to feel about their culture, and done so in a way that allows them to once again take hold of the culture, take hold of some of those positive aspects of our proverbs, of our sayings, of our understandings, and of our beliefs that can empower us to actually start to be ourselves again. If we don't manage to lift the veil of silence from our whānau so we can talk more openly about sexual health, we not only continue to perpetuate an environment where we place more of our people at risk, we also leave more whānau members in the now with the pain and trauma of dealing with sexual health issues, and to do so with limited support. And we know what happens when that's the case. We know again, looking at the statistics of sexual health, I've been forgetting to do that. When we talk about the issues of sexual health, that Māori are less likely to seek help early on. That they wait until the issues, until the problems are more acute before they present. And we also know that the later you leave it, the longer you leave it, the harder it is to get a positive outcome. We know these things. We need to find our voice again. And we also need to be brave enough to speak about the things that really matter. I struggled with infertility. I know that's a bit of an oxymoron since I've just told you about my children. But with endometriosis at the age of 23, I was told I was unlikely to be able to have children. And after my first operation and the 7 that followed, every time the reality of having children was something that wasn't an option. No, they were talking about hysterectomies, not necessarily birth. And I'd given up on it. I knew what it was like to have the thought of not being able to be a mother taken away from my dreams. I'd always wanted to be one. I knew that the opportunities of actually giving effect to my whakapapa had been curtailed, and it was painful. I wrote poetry books on the issue. And then I got to have my children. The ex-partner might have had something to do with it, but I got to have my children. And I knew beforehand, but I knew how precious the ability to see that generation, to give birth to that generation of my whakapapa, what it meant. And I also knew the responsibilities that came with it. Not just in terms of trying to be an okay mum, a good mum on a good day, but actually the responsibilities of making sure the things that my ancestors fought for those 7 generations weren't just about land and money and capital assets and fish. They fought for the existence of our people. And if I did not do what I could in terms of their hauora and in terms of the work that I do within this space, then I'm actually not giving effect to that legacy. I'm not living up to it. And I'm doing my children And my babies, children's babies, are the service. I'm not realising my whakapapa. So we need to speak up. We need to understand how we got here. We need to understand where we are now and acknowledge it and not be in denial. And we need to be bold enough to collectively strategise a new path forward. We need to believe that our whakapapa is our legacy, and it's worth the fight. If we could do it for 150 years previously, let's try and do it a little quicker this time. But let's make sure we commit the same passion, commitment, resilience, and tenacity to understanding that by not doing so, we place at risk not only us, but our children after us. Kia ora koutou.